I want to start off by reading two brief quotes from the Fountainhead. So these are both from early in the book. So if you have not done your duty and read it, this will not be spoilers. So both of these are from the hero Howard Rourke, who is, if you do not know, an architect. He says, "Here are my rules. What can be done with one substance must never be done with another. No two materials are alike. No two sites on earth are alike. No two buildings have the same purpose. The purpose, the site, the material determine the shape. Nothing can be reasonable or beautiful unless it is made by one central idea, and the idea sets every detail. A building is alive like a man. Its integrity is to follow its own truth, its own single theme, and to serve its own single purpose. A man doesn't borrow pieces of his body. A building doesn't borrow hunks of its soul. Its maker gives it the soul and every wall, window, and stairway to express it." So then a little bit later in the novel, Rourke goes to a the architect who he most admires, Henry Cameron, and asks for a job. And Cameron basically doesn't want to give it to him. Rourke shows him his drawings, and then this is Cameron's response. So I lied when I said they're both from Rourke. They're both relevant to Rourke. Cameron says, "So you think they're good? Well, they're awful. It's unspeakable. It's a crime. Look at that. What in Christ's name was your idea? What possessed you to indent that plane there? Did you just want to make it pretty because you had to patch something together? Who do you think you are? Guy Francon help you? Look at this building, you fool. You get an idea like this and you don't know what to do with it. You stumble on a magnificent thing and you have to ruin it. Do you know how much you've got to learn?" And Rourke says, "Yeah, I do. That's why I'm here." But you might think, like, well, what's going on here? Rourke knows the basic principles of architecture. He stated them eloquently. So what exactly is it that he has to learn? And what Rourke is missing is all of the architectural premises he needs to implement his architectural principles. So he knows that the central idea of a building should set every detail, but he doesn't know how to translate the theme of the building into the countless sub decisions that designing involves. For example, the what we get from work basically just has to go off of, this seems to look good, but it doesn't have any kind of premise that says, in order to achieve this basic idea, the central idea of the building, this is how I should execute, this particular plane. And so what Rourke is looking for is a mentor who can help him develop a richer set of architectural premises so that he can actually execute on his basic vision. So he knows in general what goes into architecture, but there's a lot of subtlety involved in being able to implement those principles and certainly to implement them in every last detail. And so that's really what I want to aim at in this workshop is we're going to develop our communication premises and then we're going to make them automatic. So traditionally, what you get in communication books or communication classes is you get principles and then examples. And that's hugely valuable, right? Like I really hope that people in here have read Ayn Rand's Art of Nonfiction, her Art of Non or her Art of Fiction for that matter, and listened to Leonard Peikoff's or read the book based on his lectures of objective communication. These principles are super crucial and they give you a lot of guidance. But what you ultimately need in order to be really effective and reach that next level of communication is you need to train your mind to feed you the right principles at the right time. And the only way you can do that is through practice. And so, what this boot camp is really about is guided practice in how to be an editor of your own work and of other people's work. So, for those of you who don't know much about me, the brief version is I discovered objectivism when I was 15. And I was always good at writing and interested in being a writer. But when I say good at writing, what I really mean is I enjoyed and had a certain facility with words. I could string sentences together that weren't completely clunky and, seemed to communicate something along the lines of what I was trying to communicate. But it was kind of, you could think about it as raw talent that I didn't have much control over. And when it came time to be able to convince people who didn't agree of ideas very different from their own, and do it at a professional level where people would actually like want to publish me and read me and pay me and all of that. That was nowhere near the level of probably even Rourke arriving at Cameron. Um, and so I was hired by the Ayn Rand Institute in 2006. And for the next 11 years, I had the great fortune to work with some of the best thinkers, communicators, and um, you could think of it as mentors in objectivism. And indeed, I had the good opportunity to live with one of them for a couple years. And so I had this really amazing opportunity for day after day after day of being able to create content, whether it was writing or speaking or interviews, and get critical feedback. And it was definitely critical. It was supportive, but it was constantly pointing out like this is not actually going to be clear and convincing to an audience. And it took, I would say, a few years before I could produce anything that was genuinely publishable. And it took probably 5 or 6 years before I would say I really had discovered my own voice and had a significant amount of control over my ability to communicate well. But even after 11 years, there were still areas where I was in Rourke's position with Cameron, where I didn't have all of the premises I needed, particularly when it came to issues of persuasion, which is relevant or related to issues of communication. But here you're dealing with not just did you make a clear case, but did you actually change a mind? Did you actually get people to take action? And so then I went and worked with somebody who I had worked with at the Ayn Rand Institute when he was there, Alex Epstein, and there really was able to reach a point where I felt like I had full control over my communication skills and a much deeper, richer knowledge of persuasion. And I make these points for two reasons. One, to stress the fact that where you are today is not where you have to be in the future, that you can make huge strides in communication. Let me give just one concretization of that, which is when I came to work at the Ayn Rand Institute, my writing ability, I said I had some raw talent. My speaking ability was like impossibly bad to the point where, I would have to stutter and stammer through ordering a sandwich from Subway. And so, to whatever extent I don't do that now, that was through a process of learning. And the other reason I mention it is because I have said publicly many times that to whatever extent I've been successful as a communicator, so much of it is owed to the fact that I had this very unusual opportunity to work with amazing editors and mentors over the course of 13, 14 years. And very few people have that opportunity. It's completely unusual. And indeed, if you don't want your career to be in the area of communicating ideas, you're definitely not going to have that opportunity. And yet, my goal in life, my main personal mission is that I want to help people who share my ideas become better advocates for those ideas, more effective, more successful, more enjoyable. And that includes intellectuals. It includes people who are better than me. I want to be able to assist them in any way I can, not necessarily giving them advice always, but even helping them create content, helping them strategize. But then people who are still learning, I want to give them as much of the tools as they can have. And so that's why I'm really excited to do that. Because I mean, my ideal world is I put into work for a few years and then I get to be lazy while you guys go and write all the books and give all the speeches that need to be written. So I will probably continue to do my own thing. But that's the dream, right? The dream is that I don't have to do anything because you guys have taken over and are spreading the ideas better than I could ever do. So I'm assuming, as I said, that you guys are familiar with or will familiarize yourselves with Ayn Rand's Art of Nonfiction, and especially Leonard Peikoff's Objective Communication, which is on YouTube. It's on the Ayn Rand Institute campus app or university app or campus website. I always forget which campus or university is which, but in any case, it is online, and they're truly excellent, an incredible foundation. They give, I think, the best identification of the general principles, and they give a lot of examples to help concretize those principles. So, um, that is what I'm kind of taking for granted, though we'll invoke those as we go through examples. But I wanted to share a kind of different perspective on how I think about communication, which is I think about it as you're sharing how you see the world. At the simplest level, that's all you're doing when you're communicating. We often talk about persuading or changing hearts and minds or, trying to have an impact in the world, but at the core you're just sharing how you think about things. And I want to point that out because there's no implication when you're communicating, when you're giving a speech, when you're writing an article, there's no implication that you're an infallible authority or an expert or something. And I've worked with people and talked to people who have the attitude that amounts to sort of like, all right, well, once I have Leonard Peikoff's knowledge of objectivism, then I'll speak or write. But I don't want to be presumptuous. I don't want to make a mistake. And if the issue is that communication is sharing how you see the world, then there's no implication that you're an infallible authority. Or you could think about it another way, which is you are an infallible authority. You are an infallible authority on how you see the world right now. And I mean, you can think about Ayn Rand this way, that all she's doing is saying, yeah, these are some things that I think I've figured out about what's true and what's good. And so when you're communicating, your only job is to share how you see the world. But let's take seriously what that means. Sharing how you see the world does not mean just kind of blurting out whatever happens to come to mind. It is, we can put as the first point, having high standards for how you see the world. So if persuasion is sharing with others the reasons that have convinced me of something, well, persuasion is not going to work very well if you have really garbage standards, right? Like if it's, well, why do you think JFK wasn't assassinated by a lone gunman? Well, it's, oh, I saw this documentary that said it was a mob hit. And so obviously that's true. If you don't have high standards for what persuades you, then you won't be able to persuade other people. So in sharing how you see the world, it's you want to be rigorous about how you see the world. And then the second point I would say is a stress on sharing. So communication is not journaling. It's not thinking aloud. That's hugely valuable. That's how you sharpen how you see the world. But communication is about bringing that to an audience. And that means thinking deeply about an audience. It means being able to have an antenna for, all right, I'm trying to speak to this group and share with this group. Is this clear? Is this valuable to them? Is this persuasive to them? What objections will they raise? What confusions do I have to address? Or here's a big one that I don't think gets enough attention. Is this interesting? Are are there any people that you follow who you disagree with them either about everything or about a lot of significant things, but just the experience of listening to them, reading them, it's worth doing for its own sake. It's enjoyable on its own terms, quite apart from whatever you may later look back and say, yeah, I learned something useful here. We're trying to persuade people of ideas that are incredibly incontroversial, that they're likely to disagree with. And so the more that you can be worthy of reading or listening to just for that experience alone, the more that they'll tolerate disagreeing with you and then be open to later agreeing with you. So that's the sharing point. And then the final point I'll say is that sharing how you see the world requires courage. You're opening yourself up to criticism, including self criticism. You've probably had this experience, which is you'll think you're clear on something, and then you try to explain it to somebody, and you realize, oh my gosh, I have no idea what I'm talking about. And you're making yourself vulnerable in many ways. And you've probably heard that quote. I think it's sometimes attributed to Twain or Lincoln, though probably was not ever said by either of them. But it's better to remain silent and be thought a fool than to speak and remove all doubt. And there's definitely people who I think self censor in that way and never produce anything, or they produce way less than they could out of that fear. And what I'm encouraging people in this group to do is set that to the side and exhibit that courage both in this boot camp and in real life. And I like to think of it as the karaoke principle. I remember I was at an objectivist conference years ago, and people were doing karaoke, and I observed something that you all have probably observed, which is there's two kinds of people who are fun to watch at karaoke. It's the people who are really good, and it's the people who, whether or not they're good, just go all in. They're totally in the moment. They're totally committed. They're giving it their all. There's no kind of like holding back. What is torture? The thing that is torture is the person who's kind of like one toe in the water. They're holding back, they're not committing, and and you are embarrassed watching that. And so what I'm going to suggest is have the courage to go all in. That, don't hold back, give it your best shot. How to approach this class then? I've said a little bit about that. One of the things that when you know you're going to receive feedback is the desire when you're planning your talk or writing your article is, how do I avoid getting any critical feedback? How do I make sure that this is so good that everybody in the class is just going to go, well, that was perfect. And what I'm going to stress right now is you have to set that motivation aside, because it's garbage. That there is no perfect speech, there is no perfect article. And to the extent that you could do that, you actually lose out on the value, right? However good we are at any point in our lives, we can get better. And so, what we're really looking for is you want to give the best of what you're capable of now. And then, what you should want, and it is to find, where are my blind spots? How can I get better? If you kind of like half-ass it, then you might get some feedback, and then it's, well, that's not valuable because I could have figured that out myself. Whereas if you can give it your all and then find out where there's room for improvement, that's going to give you a lot of bang for your buck. So the other thing I'll say is two more things you can do to really get the most out of this. First of all is ask questions. Leonard Peikoff once talked about the virtue of asking bad questions. And he noted that, there's this saying, there are no bad questions, only bad answers. I used to always joke when I gave live speeches, there are no bad questions, only bad questioners. But the reality of the reality of it, as Leonard points out, is there are bad questions, but you often learn more from bad ones than good ones. But whether they're bad or good questions, ask them, because there's so much of what you can't get from a book or from a course is things that address your specific context, your specific sticking points, and your particular ways that are helpful for you to understand things. And so the the, the more that you can be active in trying to pull that out of me and the other students, the better. And then finally, the advice is be very engaged when other people are giving their presentations or writing their papers. And in particular, think about, what do I think is good in this, and what do I think needs to be improved? Because what you'll find is that you'll get much more out of my analysis if you've already done your analysis. Not your analysis, if you've already done your YOUR analysis, just so nobody is confused. The 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 It's very easy to listen to a presentation passively and then just listen to the commentary on it passively and think, yeah, that's obvious, like I would have seen that. But again, we're trying to train our mind so that when we sit down to look at our own outline, to look at our own piece, we want our subconscious to feed us the right questions. We want our subconscious to tell us, this isn't clear, this is confusing, this is boring. And you won't be training your subconscious unless you do the independent work and then take in my feedback. So encourage everybody to be as engaged as possible when other people are involved. Though obviously, I think you can get a lot out of your own writing and your own speaking. And well, I was going to make one more point about that, but I think that's sufficient. All right, so let's stop for questions. Let's see what people have been saying in the chat.